Meals behind bars, the hidden truth of prison kitchens. Subscribe for more real crime stories. Like, share, and join the discussion below. The smell hit first, a thick, sour mix of spoiled meat and bleach. Inmates at Monroe State Prison lined up with metal trays, their faces tense. The kitchen worker at the front of the line scooped a lump of grayish stew onto each tray. One inmate looked down, poked it with a spoon, and froze. There, floating in the greasy soup, was something that shouldn't have been there, something that made his stomach twist. "Hey," he shouted, slamming his tray onto the counter. The room went silent. Even the guards looked up. Moments later, chaos broke out. Inmates yelling, guards shouting, food flying across the cafeteria. In the middle of it all, one terrified kitchen worker whispered under his breath, "They told me to serve it anyway." That was the moment everything changed. What started as a rumor about bad food was about to uncover something far worse, a secret that reached far beyond the prison walls. But to understand how it all began, we have to go back a few weeks earlier, when the kitchen doors first swung open for the morning shift. At 4:30 a.m., the Monroe State Prison kitchen came alive with the sound of clanging pots and buzzing lights. Inmates, wearing white uniforms, lined up to clock in. Among them was Eddie Johnson, a quiet man serving a 10-year sentence for theft. Eddie had been assigned to kitchen duty, a job most inmates avoided because of the endless hours and strict supervisors. But for him, it was a way to stay out of trouble and maybe earn a few privileges. The head cook, Mr. Daniels, barked orders as he checked his clipboard. "We've got 2,000 mouths to feed," he said. "No mistakes today." Eddie nodded and started peeling potatoes. But as he worked, he noticed something strange. Several boxes of ingredients in the storage room had no labels and others were marked, "Not for human consumption." He thought it was a mistake. But when he brought it up to another worker, Marcus, the older man, just gave a nervous laugh. "Keep quiet, man," Marcus whispered. "You don't want to know what's really in those boxes." Days turned into weeks. The food got worse. Watery beans, spoiled milk, green-tinted bread. Some inmates complained of stomach pain, but the guards ignored them. Then Eddie saw something that made his heart race. A delivery truck pulling into the loading dock late at night, hours after normal food shipments arrived. He watched as two guards unloaded crates and rolled them straight into the freezer. No inspection, no paperwork. When Eddie tried to peek inside, one of the guards stopped him. "You didn't see nothin', Johnson," the man said coldly. From that night on, Eddie couldn't sleep. Something was wrong with the prison food, and he was determined to find out what. But one morning, when he walked into the kitchen, he saw a new notice pinned to the wall. It read, "Staff under investigation. Do not discuss kitchen operations." Eddie looked around and realized half the usual workers were gone. The room felt colder, quieter. And in the middle of the kitchen floor sat one of the unlabeled boxes, torn open, with a dark liquid leaking from it. As he stepped closer to look inside, a guard's voice echoed from behind him. "Step away from that box, inmate." The lid shifted slightly, and what Eddie saw inside would change everything. Eddie froze, his eyes locked on the open box. The guard's boots thudded on the concrete floor as he approached, his hand resting on his belt. Eddie's heart pounded. He wasn't supposed to see this, whatever this was. The liquid seeping from the torn box smelled foul, metallic, and rotten. The guard's face was stone cold as he kicked the lid shut. "Back to your station, Johnson," he barked. "You didn't see a thing." Eddie nodded slowly and turned away, but his mind was racing. He knew something wasn't right. Later that day, when the guards switched shifts, he sneaked back to the storage room. The boxes were gone, every single one. But there was something else left behind. A torn delivery slip with the words "Private Supply, Internal Use Only," stamped in red ink. That night, he couldn't sleep. The other inmates complained about stomach cramps again. One man even passed out after dinner. The nurse brushed it off, saying it was probably bad digestion. But Eddie knew it was more than that. The next morning, Marcus pulled Eddie aside in the dish room. Steam fogged the air as Marcus whispered, "You're not the only one who's noticed. The kitchen's been messed up for months. Ever since those new contracts came in, food's been coming from who knows where." Eddie frowned. "Contracts?" You mean the food supplier? Marcus nodded and looked around nervously. Yeah, but it's deeper than that. Some of the guards are getting paid off to sign off fake deliveries. We're cooking garbage food because someone's pocketing the money meant for real ingredients. Eddie felt his stomach twist. You mean they're poisoning us just to save a few bucks? Marcus lowered his voice. Not just save. They're making money. Big money. Over the next few days, Eddie started paying closer attention. He noticed that every Wednesday, a certain truck came in unmarked, always after dark. And the next morning, strange boxes would appear in the walk-in freezer, full of gray meat and bags of watery soup mix. He also noticed that every Thursday, the guards in charge of kitchen duty seemed unusually cheerful. They joked more, stayed out of the way, and let things slide. Eddie realized those were the days they got paid off. Then one morning, during breakfast prep, the water in the sink turned black. Eddie jumped back, coughing as the smell of rot filled the air. Something's wrong with the pipes, he yelled. Mr. Daniels rushed over, frowning. Keep working, he said sharply. Maintenance will handle it. But no one came. They used bottled water for the rest of the day, except for the soup. The soup still used tap water. That night, several inmates ended up in the infirmary. Eddie couldn't take it anymore. He decided to dig deeper. He found a cracked vent behind the pantry and started hiding small notes there, documenting everything he saw. The deliveries, the bad food, the sick inmates. He planned to send it to someone outside the prison when he could find a way. But the more he wrote, the more dangerous it became. One night, while he was cleaning up, the lights in the kitchen suddenly went out. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The room went pitch black. Footsteps echoed behind him. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Johnson, a voice said quietly. You've been asking too many questions. Eddie turned toward the sound, but before he could speak, something cold and hard pressed against the back of his neck. Then a whisper. You should have kept your mouth shut. When Eddie woke up, the kitchen lights were back on, but he was lying on the cold floor, his head throbbing. The smell of bleach stung his nose, and a mop bucket stood nearby. For a moment, he thought he had dreamed it all. But when he touched the back of his neck, there was a bruise the size of a coin. Someone had sent him a warning. The next morning, Mr. Daniels acted like nothing had happened. He walked past Eddie with his usual clipboard and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We've got a surprise inspection today, he announced. Everyone better be on their best behavior. Eddie's stomach tightened. He had heard of these inspections before, staged events meant to make the kitchen look perfect while hiding the truth. The floors would shine, the food trays would be stacked neatly, and the inspectors would never see the rotten meat or spoiled vegetables stored out back. But this time, Eddie had a plan. The night before, he had managed to sneak a small scrap of paper into a bag of dry rice, the kind that always went to the front of the kitchen line. On it, he wrote everything. The fake deliveries, the bad water, the sick inmates, and the guards who looked the other way. His hope was that one of the inspectors might notice it when they opened the bag for testing. When the inspection began, 2 officials in suits and latex gloves entered the kitchen, followed by a warden. Eddie kept his head down, stirring the giant pot of oatmeal, while Marcus worked beside him, pretending to scrub trays. Every movement felt like a risk. One of the inspectors opened a bag of rice, poured it into a bowl, and froze. The tiny folded paper slid out and landed on the counter. Eddie watched from across the room, heart hammering in his chest. The inspector unfolded it slowly, reading each line. His expression shifted. First confusion, then disbelief, then something like anger. He whispered something to the warden. The warden stiffened, his face pale. Then, before Eddie could process what was happening, the warden turned to Mr. Daniels. We need to talk, he said. Mr. Daniels smiled, trying to keep calm. Of course, sir. Everything all right? But his voice trembled. An hour later, 2 guards entered the kitchen. Not the usual ones. These men wore different uniforms, with state investigation patches on their sleeves. They told everyone to step back. Boxes were opened, freezers checked, and samples collected. The inspectors worked in silence, documenting every spoiled item they found. Marcus whispered to Eddie, "You did it, man." Eddie didn't answer. He was watching Mr. Daniels, whose face had gone completely white. By the end of the day, the kitchen was shut down. The investigators escorted Mr. Daniels away in handcuffs. A few of the guards followed. Eddie felt a strange mix of victory and fear. He knew this wasn't over. People like Daniels didn't act alone. That night, as he lay in his bunk, he overheard two guards whispering near the hallway. "They're bringing in state investigators," one said. "They're gonna find everything, the contracts, the payments, all of it." "Yeah," the other replied. "But someone's gotta make sure it doesn't go any further." Eddie's chest tightened. He knew that meant him. He waited until the lights went out, then pulled out one last note, the one he'd hidden in his shoe. It had a name and an address, a reporter who once covered prison corruption cases. He had memorized it weeks ago, just in case. The next day, when the food trucks arrived, Eddie slipped the note under the windshield wiper of a delivery van before it left the compound. He didn't know if the driver would see it, or if it would ever reach the reporter. But that was his only hope. Days later, whispers spread through the prison. News reporters were outside, and state officials were demanding access to kitchen contracts. The guards were tense, and the warden had disappeared from his office. Eddie stood by the serving line, ladling out gray oatmeal, when Marcus leaned close and whispered, "You think they'll tell the world?" Eddie looked toward the barred window, where faint light filtered in through the grime. "If they don't," he said quietly, "I will." Outside, sirens wailed as investigators poured in. Inside, the kitchen was silent, except for the faint drip of a leaking pipe, echoing through the blue-tinted walls of the prison's most secret room. And for the first time, Eddie knew the truth behind those meals wasn't just being served anymore, it was finally being exposed.